Your property line ends where I park.
Then you'll learn where it sinks.
Her SUV's front tires crushed the edge of my lawn like it was her personal driveway. The morning sun reflected off the chrome as she stepped out, clipboard in hand, crimson blazer catching the light like a warning flare. Vanessa Crowley, the name every neighbor whispered with clenched teeth and fake smiles. The self-appointed queen of rules who thought she owned this cul-de-sac. "Mr. Rourke," she said, tapping the pen against her clipboard, "your grass line extends 6 inches past regulation. I'm writing a citation." I looked at the indentation her tires had made in my soil, 3 inches deep, slick with dew. "You mean the lawn you just parked on?" She smiled the kind of smile people give when they believe they can't be challenged. HOA board members are exempt from temporary access violations. "And homeowners?" I asked. "Homeowners," she replied, "follow orders." The way she said it, like she was the law itself, made my jaw tighten. What she didn't know was that the ground beneath her precious SUV wasn't ordinary. I had rebuilt it myself after the last storm season. Layered compacted fill, drainage mesh, and a reinforced retaining system that ran like a secret skeleton under the property line. I'd built foundations for hospitals, bridges, homes that still stood after hurricanes. I knew exactly how fragile her side was, and how stable mine would always be. If you've ever felt that quiet surge, the one where someone underestimates you right before realizing they shouldn't, stay right here and hit subscribe now. This is where arrogance meets engineering. "Ma'am," I said, folding my arms, "your front wheel is sitting on a reinforced boundary. I designed it to support 40 tons. But your side?" I nodded toward the uneven ground by her flower bed. "That's all vanity soil, decorative fill, no compaction." The clipboard queen tilted her head, pretending to write. "So, now you're a soil expert?" I didn't answer. She wouldn't have understood, not yet. She bent to mark the citation form, her heels sinking slightly into the soft turf. That's when the faint crack came, the kind that only an engineer hears, not loud, not dangerous, but telling. Pressure imbalance, moisture trapped under the subgrade, a shift waiting for weight. "Your lawn is unstable," she said flatly, standing again. "Probably because you've been overwatering. You'll receive notice of fine by mail." I looked at her car again, a luxury model with tires the size of small boulders. Every morning, she parked it inches closer to my fence, sometimes even on it. Every night, I'd find the tread marks etched into the soil, like small signatures of disrespect. The HOA's rules said nothing about members parking on homeowner lots, because she wrote those rules. "Vanessa," I said, trying to keep my tone even, "this boundary, my father poured this retaining wall himself 30 years ago. It's not just dirt, it's memory, it's work. You can't keep driving over it." She laughed lightly. "Then maybe you should have joined the board, Mr. Rourke." No apology, no recognition, just the smug dismissal of a tyrant in heels. My father used to say, "Engineers build what lasts, not what looks good." Vanessa Crowley built appearances, HOA flyers, newsletters, fines, and illusions of control. She didn't see the cracks forming under her own system. When she finally drove off, the air smelled like engine heat and arrogance. I crouched near the tire track, pressing my fingers into the displaced soil. Moisture seeped up, dark, thick, wrong. The underground drainage on her side wasn't holding. The rains last week had saturated it beyond the compaction threshold. She was too proud to notice. But I did. That moment wasn't revenge. It was realization. Her empire was sinking, literally. I stood up, brushing dirt from my hands, watching the sunlight fade across her immaculate lawn. The ornamental stones near her driveway had started to tilt. Imperceptible to anyone else, but to me, they were alarms. She wanted war over 6 inches of grass. She was standing on a fault line she'd created herself. I whispered to the quiet street, not for her, not for anyone, just to myself. "You picked the wrong ground to stand on." The neighborhood felt still, but not peaceful, like the air before a storm. And somewhere deep beneath, the soil agreed with me. By the next morning, her SUV was back, parked even deeper on the edge of my lawn, like she wanted to prove the ground wouldn't dare fight back. The dew shimmered across the hood, but underneath I could see the faint sag in the soil. To anyone else, it looked fine. To me, it looked ready to fail. Vanessa Crowley strutted out of her front door in that same crimson blazer, holding her clipboard like it was a weapon. "Mr. Rourke," she called, her voice echoing down the cul-de-sac. "I've had another complaint about your property line. You seem to have an ongoing disregard for community harmony." "Community harmony?" I said, leaning against my fence. "Is that what you call parking violations now?" Her eyes narrowed. "You might want to tone down your attitude. The HOA doesn't respond well to hostility." I wanted to laugh. Hostility? This woman had fined Mrs. Eddington $300 for having wind chimes. She'd forced a veteran to repaint his mailbox because it wasn't on the approved beige list. The officer of rules didn't respond to reason, only to resistance. The way she stood there, pen poised like a judge ready to deliver a verdict, reminded me of something my father used to say when I worked under him on job sites. Some people only learn when the ground gives way under their feet. "Vanessa," I said calmly, "you ever wonder, what's under your driveway?" She blinked. "Concrete, obviously." "Concrete's only as good as what's beneath it," I said. "And what's beneath yours isn't as solid as you think." The clipboard queen rolled her eyes. "You can save the dramatic warnings, Mr. Rourke. I've heard enough of your engineering sermons. The board doesn't have time for conspiracy theories about soil." She turned and began striding back to her SUV. That was when the sound came again, a soft, deep pop under her tires. She didn't notice, but I did. Every action has a reaction. She'd been compacting her own subgrade every time she parked there, forcing air pockets to form under the surface. The heavy rain had done the rest. Nature was quietly recording every violation she'd ignored. Later that day, I stood by my mailbox as a few neighbors gathered near the corner, pretending not to stare. Word traveled fast here. Everyone was tired of her reign. The fines, the petty threats, the unannounced inspections. They'd seen her humiliate an old man for keeping bird feeders too close to the curb. Yet, when it came time to stand up, silence always won. That's when Ellen Draper approached, a thin, quiet woman who served as the HOA's secretary. She clutched her tote bag close to her chest and spoke in a low tone. "Evan, she's planning to push a new boundary ordinance next week. Something about extending HOA maintenance jurisdiction another 3 feet onto every homeowner's property." I looked at her sharply. "She's trying to claim my lawn?" Ellen nodded. "She calls it standardizing the easement, but it means she'd legally control everything up to your front porch." The clipboard queen wasn't just parking for convenience anymore. She was testing the limits, physically and legally. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Ellen's eyes darted toward Vanessa's house. "Because she's wrong, and because she's about to make the entire neighborhood her enemy." Her voice trembled when she said it. I could tell she was scared, not of me, but of the tyrant in heels who ruled this block like a private kingdom. That night, I couldn't sleep. The streetlights reflected off her car across the yard, throwing long shadows over my fence. The weight of what I knew pressed into my mind. She was building her empire on unstable ground, and she was dragging everyone else with her. I pulled out my father's old plans, the ones we used to repair erosion near the river embankments years ago. Every line, every calculation told the same story. The soil on her side was compromised. Her front lawn wasn't just sinking, it was collapsing from within. But I needed proof, not instinct. I made a decision. Tomorrow, I'd run a geotech scan, quietly, legally, professionally. And if my suspicion was right, Vanessa Crowley was about to face the one thing she couldn't find her way out of, gravity itself. As I turned off the porch, light, I caught sight of her silhouette through her window, arms folded, still wearing that same crimson blazer. She looked like she was guarding a throne that wasn't meant to last. I whispered to the dark street, "Let's see how your rules hold up when the ground stops listening." By sunrise, I had my equipment out, the handheld soil scanner, ground penetration monitor, and a calibrated pressure probe I hadn't used since my firm downsized. The neighborhood was still quiet, the air damp with early fog. I moved fast, scanning along the border where her tires had been pressing in. The display flickered, then pulsed red. Air gaps. Deep ones. I crouched lower, tapping the screen, double-checking the readings. Beneath the decorative fill on her side of the property line was a cavity nearly 3 feet deep. Saturated clay, uncompacted fill, and water intrusion, the unholy trinity of foundation failure. And she had no idea. I heard the door slam across the street. The clipboard queen appeared in her crimson blazer, coffee in hand, eyes locked on me like I'd just trespassed on sacred ground. "Mr. Rourke!" Her voice cut through the mist. "Why are you kneeling in my direction again?" I straightened, wiping my hands on my jeans. "Checking the drainage gradient. It's sloping the wrong way." The HOA landscaping contractor already addressed that. She adjusted her glasses and took a sip of coffee. "You shouldn't be poking around other people's property." "It's called due diligence," I said evenly. "You keep parking over an unstable subgrade. You're compressing fill that's already saturated. You could lose structural integrity. Fast." Her smirk didn't fade. "Is this another one of your engineer horror stories? You've been predicting doom for weeks." Before I could respond, a car door shut behind me. Ellen Draper approached, clutching her tote again, eyes darting between us. The conflicted witness looked like she hadn't slept either. "Morning, Vanessa," she said softly, offering a nervous smile. The officer of rules gave her a glance cold enough to freeze air. "Ellen, shouldn't you be reviewing meeting notes instead of lingering in the street?" Ellen hesitated, then stepped closer to me, her voice a whisper. "I saw the draft of her new ordinance. She's planning to get signatures tonight. It's real." My chest tightened. "Even after I warned her?" "She doesn't care," Ellen said, shaking her head. "She thinks you're bluffing about the soil." Vanessa Crowley crossed her arms, her tone sharp. "If you're discussing board matters, Ms. Draper, I suggest you remember your confidentiality clause." That was the moment Ellen's hands trembled, just slightly. She looked like someone standing on the edge of a confession, torn between fear and conscience. "Vanessa," I said, meeting the enforcer in crimson's glare, "you ever heard of differential settlement?" She scoffed. "I'm not here for your technical jargon. It's what happens when one side of a structure shifts faster than the other. You keep parking that tank on your lawn, you'll find out firsthand." "Enough." She turned on her heel and started walking back toward her driveway. "This discussion is over. You're just trying to intimidate me." But Ellen didn't move. She watched Vanessa's heels click across the uneven pavement, then leaned closer. "She's lying about the permits, too. The HOA spent money to replace her retaining wall last year, without member approval. It's not up to code." That got my full attention. "You're sure?" She nodded quickly. "I typed the payment voucher myself. It went through a landscaping contractor who isn't licensed for foundation repair. If that wall gives way, it's on her." The ground beneath Vanessa's SUV gave a faint creak as she opened the driver's door. Ellen's eyes widened. "She's going to make it worse." I exhaled slowly. "Then we make her listen." Vanessa shot one last glare at us before sliding behind the wheel. "You two look awfully cozy," she sneered. "Careful, Ms. Draper. Consorting with violators could affect your board standing." Ellen's face drained of color. She turned away quickly and hurried back inside. I knew what that look meant, fear mixed with guilt, the silent torment of someone trapped under authority they no longer respected. As Vanessa drove off, her SUV's weight made a dull, drawn-out groan beneath the tires. The board chair didn't even flinch, but I could feel it, the subtle vibration that told me gravity was waiting patiently to finish what she started. I packed up my scanner, staring at the street she ruled like a monarch. I'd seen this pattern 100 times in my career: pressure, denial, collapse. The only difference now was that this one had a name and an audience. And when it failed, everyone would see what happens when arrogance ignores physics. That afternoon, the air turned heavy with humidity, thick, still, waiting. The kind of atmosphere that makes the ground sweat before it breaks. I stood by my porch railing, watching as the enforcer in crimson walked from house to house, clipboard tucked under her arm like a sword of authority. Vanessa Crowley's heels clicked against the pavement with the rhythm of someone too certain of her power. She was gathering signatures. Her new ordinance, Easement Reinforcement and Curb Integrity Act, a fancy name for legalized control. I counted 8 signatures before she even crossed the street. Neighbors who used to complain about her were now nodding, signing, avoiding eye contact. Fear did strange things to people. When she reached my driveway, she didn't even bother to greet me. "Mr. Rourke," she began. I'm collecting formal consent from residents to approve boundary realignment for maintenance access. You'll want a sign, of course. I leaned against the post, arms folded. You mean the part where you take 3 more feet of every yard in this neighborhood? She smiled thinly. Don't be dramatic. This is administrative housekeeping. It protects everyone. From what? Property ownership? Her pen hovered just above the line where my name was pre-printed. She'd already filled it in. It protects us from liability when things go wrong, she said coolly. And given your unstable landscaping, you should be thanking me. The clipboard queen's arrogance wasn't just personal anymore. It was structural. She wanted to own the land beneath people's homes. I'm not signing, I said flatly. Then you'll face a compliance review, she replied, snapping the pen back into her pocket. We're implementing fines for non-cooperation. Something about her tone told me she'd already planned this moment. She wanted confrontation, needed it. Bullies don't just want obedience, they crave resistance so they can crush it publicly. She turned to leave, but I caught her before she reached her SUV. Vanessa, I said, I ran a soil test this morning. You're building on failure. There's a void under your driveway. It's spreading. The tyrant in heels stopped mid-step. That's impossible. Nothing about this neighborhood's drainage system is impossible. You should know. You approved the redesign. Her jaw clenched. Those plans were verified by a professional contractor. Then that contractor cut corners, I said, because your runoff is seeping under the structural grade. You keep parking there, you'll be lucky if it doesn't swallow your vehicle. For a split second, the officer of rules hesitated. I saw it, an involuntary flicker of uncertainty behind her confidence. Then, just as quickly, she buried it beneath a smirk. You're bluffing, she said, climbing into her SUV. And if you're wrong, I'll fine you for defamation. Her tires rolled backward onto the weak slope. The soil shifted, soft, barely audible, but I heard it, a whisper beneath the surface. By dusk, Ellen Draper came knocking. She looked paler than ever, eyes wide, hands shaking. She's called an emergency meeting for tonight, she said, stepping inside. She's going to pass that easement law before anyone can object. She's already got the signatures. I frowned. Even with the conflict of interest clause? She removed it, Ellen said quietly, edited the bylaws herself, claimed it was a formatting correction. That was the breaking point. I could fight her arrogance in public, but this, tampering with HOA governance, this was illegal. Ellen, I said, you still have access to the board's digital log, right? She hesitated. Yes, but if I'm caught, you won't be. You'll just download one thing for me, the last contractor's invoice. Her eyes searched mine, terrified, yet desperate. If I help you, will you fix this? For everyone? I'll stop her, I said firmly. But you have to trust me. Ellen nodded weakly. I'll send it tonight, but if she finds out, she'll ruin me. As she slipped back out into the street, the first rumble of thunder rolled across the horizon. Rain was coming, the kind that tests everything built on lies. Across the cul-de-sac, Vanessa stood under her porch light, phone pressed to her ear, smiling like a politician watching her empire expand. She had no idea that the very ground she ruled was eroding beneath her feet, and I wasn't going to warn her again. The rain hit just after midnight, slow at first, then violent, pounding against the roofs until every gutter overflowed. I stood on my porch with a flashlight, watching sheets of water cascade down the street, tracing the path of the runoff like veins through the neighborhood. The storm drain near Vanessa Crowley's house was already struggling. The excess water had nowhere to go except down. I stepped off the porch and walked toward the curb, boots splashing through the rising puddles. The air smelled of wet earth and asphalt. Each time lightning flashed, I could see the subtle sag along her driveway deepen. Gravity was writing its verdict in real time. A notification buzzed on my phone, a message from Ellen Draper. Got it. Sent to your inbox. Be careful. I opened the file under the glow of the streetlight. It was worse than I thought. The invoice she'd pulled wasn't from a certified foundation contractor. It was from a landscaping company owned by Vanessa's brother-in-law. The same firm had billed the HOA for surface stabilization 3 times in 6 months. Fraud disguised as maintenance. The board chair wasn't just reckless. She was laundering HOA funds through family. A car door slammed across the street. Even through the rain, I saw the enforcer in crimson step out, holding her phone to her ear, yelling into the wind. Her SUV sat at an angle now, one tire lower than the rest. She didn't notice. I called out, "You might want to back that up, Vanessa. The slope's giving way." She turned, glare sharp as lightning. "You again? Don't you ever sleep?" "I do, but your foundation doesn't." She marched closer, the rain flattening her hair, the crimson of her blazer turning dark and heavy. "You think you're clever, don't you? Running your little soil experiments, meddling in board affairs." "I think I'm watching physics do its job," I said, stepping aside as a chunk of mud sloughed off the edge of her driveway. The clipboard queen froze for half a second, then shook it off, pretending she hadn't noticed. "If you're caught tampering with HOA property, I'll have you fined and evicted." "Funny," I said, "because according to this invoice, HOA property's already been tampered with, and by someone named Crowley Landscaping Solutions." Her eyes widened for just a moment before narrowing again. "You stole board records?" "Ellen sent them to me," I said. "And unless I'm reading wrong, that's a violation of state HOA law. Conflict of interest, misuse of funds, false reporting. You built your authority on a lie." The tyrant in heels took one slow step forward. "You wouldn't dare make that public." "Try me," I said quietly. "You've been fining retirees for mailbox colors while pocketing kickbacks from your own contracts. The only thing you haven't controlled yet is gravity." Lightning cracked so close the ground trembled. She jumped slightly, glancing toward her SUV. The rear tires dipped lower. "You're bluffing," she hissed, though her voice was quieter now. "That ground's been solid for years." I raised the flashlight toward the pooling water line. "Not anymore." Another deep groan echoed from beneath the driveway, low and ominous. The officer of rules looked back, just in time to see a hairline fracture snake across the concrete. Her SUV shifted half an inch. "Vanessa," I said, "get your car off that slab, now." She hesitated, jaw locked between pride and panic. "It's fine," she snapped, climbing in and starting the engine. As the tires spun against the slick mud, the slab gave a slow, shuddering sigh. The vehicle lurched sideways, not fast, just enough to tilt. Her scream cut through the rain as the front bumper dipped toward the forming pit. I ran forward, flashlight beam bouncing, water slapping against my legs. "Cut the engine!" She did, trembling, gripping the wheel. The SUV had sunk only a few feet, but the message was written in mud and fear. When I reached her door, she refused my hand. "Don't touch me," she snapped, though her voice was shaking. "Fine," I said, "but you're not dealing with a neighbor anymore. You're dealing with evidence." As she climbed out, soaked and humiliated, she glanced toward the street where Ellen stood under an umbrella, watching in silence. For the first time, the clipboard queen's eyes flickered, not with anger, but with dread. She whispered, barely audible, "You don't know what you've started." "Oh," I said, stepping back. "I think it's what you started. I'm just finishing it." The rain intensified, washing over the cracked concrete, erasing her authority one drop at a time. By morning, the storm had passed, but the street looked like a battlefield. Mud tracks ran like scars down the asphalt, and the edge of Vanessa Crowley's driveway had caved just enough to expose the hollow beneath. Her SUV sat tilted, half rescued by a tow truck, half still defying gravity. Neighbors gathered in quiet clusters, whispering, phones recorded. And right there, in the middle of it all, the enforcer in crimson stood with her clipboard tucked protectively to her chest, her hair still damp from last night's disaster. "This was sabotage," she announced to the small crowd. "Someone tampered with the ground on my property." I stepped forward before the rumor could take root. "Gravity doesn't need help to expose fraud, Vanessa." Her head snapped toward me. "Don't you dare accuse me in front of my residents." "Your residents?" I said, crossing my arms. "You don't own them. You've been fining them for everything from mailbox paint to lawn length while you've been hiding illegal payments in HOA accounts." The clipboard queen's jaw clenched, but she forced a laugh. "That's quite an imagination you have, Mr. Rourke. I hope you have proof before you start broadcasting slander." I pulled my phone from my pocket. "Oh, I do." The crowd murmured as I projected the downloaded invoice onto my tablet screen. Crowley Landscaping Solutions, 3 payments, all authorized by Vanessa's digital signature. The silence that followed was deafening. "That's not what it looks like," she stammered. "It looks like conflict of interest," I said, "and misuse of community funds." Her face reddened. "You had no right to access internal documents. And you had no right to bury your mistakes under decorative fill," I shot back. "Ellen, tell them what you found." The conflicted witness froze, her hands trembling as every eye turned toward her. I could see the war in her eyes, loyalty versus conscience. She stepped forward slowly, voice trembling but clear. "The invoice is real," Ellen said softly. "I processed the payment. Vanessa told me it was urgent maintenance, but the contractor wasn't certified for structural work. I'm sorry." Vanessa's composure shattered. "You little traitor," she hissed. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Ellen flinched but didn't back down. "I'm telling the truth." The officer of rules stormed closer, her heels sinking slightly into the softened earth. "You'll regret this, both of you." Her threat hung in the air, sharp and personal. The crowd exchanged nervous glances. A few neighbors, ones she'd fined before, took a slow step backward, as if finally realizing how far her power had gone. I met her glare head on. "You can threaten us all you want, but physics doesn't care about intimidation. That sinkhole was waiting for you, not me." Lightning didn't strike this time, but something heavier fell. Public silence. It pressed on her like weight. Finally she turned, thrust her clipboard into the hands of a stunned resident, and barked, "Board meeting, tonight, mandatory attendance." As she stormed off toward her house, I felt the shift. Her control wasn't absolute anymore. It was desperate. Later that afternoon, I sat in my garage surrounded by blueprints, soil reports, and photos from the storm. I mapped the entire subgrade structure beneath the shared property line. The sinkhole wasn't a fluke. It was a chain reaction. The water runoff from her unauthorized retaining wall had been weakening the compacted clay for months. This wasn't nature's accident. It was negligence with a clock. I printed the report, added timestamps, and sent a copy to the county infrastructure department. It wasn't revenge, it was documentation. When dusk settled, I saw Ellen's porch light flicker once, then twice. A quiet signal we'd agreed on. She'd overheard something. I walked across the street under the dim glow of the lamppost. Ellen met me halfway, voice shaking. "She's meeting with the other board members inside right now. She said she's going to rewrite the incident before you can file anything." "Rewriting reality doesn't change gravity," I said grimly. "She's calling in the HOA attorney," Ellen whispered. "She's desperate. She said she'll frame you for property damage if she has to." I exhaled slowly, the cold air thick in my lungs. "Then it's time to stop playing defense." As thunder rolled faintly in the distance, I glanced toward Vanessa's glowing windows. Inside, silhouettes moved, frantic, cornered, plotting. I whispered, mostly to myself, "You built your kingdom on mud, Vanessa, and mud doesn't hold power for long." That night, the storm didn't return, but the tension felt heavier than thunder. I could almost feel it pulsing beneath the pavement, the quiet before a different kind of collapse. The HOA's emergency meeting was in full swing inside the community center. The board chair had called it a special review session. Everyone knew what that meant: damage control. I stood outside near the glass windows, just far enough to see without being seen. Inside, Vanessa Crowley stood at the podium like a senator in crimson armor, her clipboard shining under the fluorescent lights. The enforcer in crimson was calm now, rehearsed. I could almost hear her voice through the glass. "This community has suffered misinformation," she said, gesturing gracefully, "and I intend to protect its reputation." Her audience, half frightened, half furious, shifted uneasily in their chairs. She always performed well under pressure, but I could tell by her rigid posture that, this time, she was fighting for survival, not authority. Ellen Draper sat at the far end of the table, pale, avoiding eye contact. The flickering overhead lights made her look ghost-like, like someone caught between truth and guilt. I waited until a group of latecomers entered, then slipped inside quietly, taking a spot near the back. The officer of rules continued. "As of today, we're investigating unauthorized tampering with HOA property that directly led to structural compromise. Our records suggest deliberate interference." The clipboard queen turned her sharp gaze in my direction. "By Mr. Rourke." The room stiffened. Neighbors whispered. I walked forward slowly, every step deliberate. You're accusing me of causing a geological failure with, what? My shovel? Her smirk was thin. You're a structural engineer, are you not? You knew precisely how to destabilize the soil. Correction, I said, standing beside her podium. I knew how to analyze it. The difference is science, not sabotage. I pulled a small folder from my jacket and opened it to reveal the photos Ellen had helped me retrieve, time-stamped drainage reports, the contractor's forged inspection signatures, and the payment receipts linked directly to Vanessa's family business. I placed them on the podium between us. Here's your real instability. The room fell silent. You could hear the air conditioning hum. Vanessa didn't touch the folder. She just stared at it, then at me. Those documents are inadmissible, she snapped. This isn't a courtroom, I said evenly. It's a neighborhood, and everyone here deserves to know why their property values are sinking, literally. Someone in the back shouted, "My fence collapsed last week." Another voice joined in. "Our driveway's cracking too." The clipboard queen's expression hardened, but her hand trembled just enough for me to see it. She turned to Ellen, voice sharp. "Did you give him these files?" Ellen stood, voice barely steady. "I did, because you told us to falsify the maintenance reports. You said the HOA couldn't afford another inspection." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The tyrant in heels spun around, her face pale now. "You don't know what you're saying." "I know exactly what I'm saying," Ellen whispered. "You made us lie, and now half this neighborhood is sinking because of it." The silence that followed was electric, thick, raw, impossible to break. Finally, I stepped forward, keeping my tone calm but razor sharp. "Vanessa, your seawall, your easement, your false contracts, they're all tied to you. But I'll give you one last chance. Step down, resign tonight, and I'll let the county handle this quietly." Her eyes glistened, not from emotion, but from fury. "You think you can humiliate me and walk away clean?" "I don't think," I said softly. "I know gravity doesn't need my help to finish the job." She slammed her clipboard onto the podium. "This meeting is adjourned," she barked, storming out as murmurs rose into open outrage. Ellen exhaled, tears welling in her eyes. "She's going to come after you now," she whispered. "Let her," I said. "By tomorrow morning, she'll have more to worry about than me." Because while she was inside trying to rewrite the narrative, I'd already sent the full documentation, photos, soil data, payment records, to the county infrastructure office and the local news tip line. And the first reply had already arrived in my inbox before the meeting even ended. "Investigation accepted. Structural audit begins at 8 a.m. Outside, as Vanessa's taillights disappeared down the slick road, I caught Ellen's hostile eye. "You did the right thing," I told her. She nodded weakly. "I just hope it's not too late." I looked toward the dark line of the cracked curb where her SUV had tilted the night before. The ground was still moving, slowly, quietly, relentlessly. "It's already too late for her," I said. By dawn, I was already in the garage, blueprint sheets spread out across the workbench like battle plans. The faint hum of the dehumidifier filled the silence while I traced fault lines across the soil map. Every inch of the data confirmed what I'd been saying from the start. Vanessa Crowley hadn't just ignored the warnings. She'd built her kingdom right over a void. The enforcer in crimson had signed off on her own downfall. Ellen texted just after 6 a.m. "County engineers are here. Vanessa's trying to block the inspection." I grabbed my coffee and stepped outside. Sure enough, 2 county trucks idled by the curb near her property. Men in reflective vests, setting up markers around the damaged seawall. And there she was, standing between them and her driveway like a soldier defending a crumbling fort. "You're not authorized to be here," she snapped, waving her clipboard as if it could stop the law. One of the inspectors held up his badge. "Ma'am, this order came from the County Infrastructure Division. If the ground beneath your retaining wall is compromised, we have jurisdiction." Her voice cracked, louder now. "This is private HOA property. You have no right to trespass." I stepped forward. "He's got every right, Vanessa. You just didn't read the fine print in your own bylaws." She turned sharply, eyes bloodshot from a sleepless night. "You think you've won?" I didn't answer. I just nodded toward the inspector, who lowered a metal probe into the soil. It sank almost halfway before hitting resistance. He looked up grimly. "Subsidence confirmed. There's significant voiding beneath this section. The clipboard queen's mask faltered. That's impossible, she whispered. I stepped closer, my tone steady. You used fill dirt and a plastic liner to save costs. That liner trapped the runoff, and the erosion spread beneath your foundation. This wasn't sabotage, Vanessa. It was basic cause and effect. Her glare hardened. You'll regret this. I'll sue you for defamation. Go ahead, I said. You'll have to file from a rental once your mansion's condemned. Behind her, one of the engineers tapped the seawall with a hammer. The hollow echo made everyone freeze. Ellen approached quietly, her expression drawn but resolute. Vanessa, she said softly, you could have fixed this months ago. You just wouldn't listen. Stay out of this, the tyrant in heels hissed. You betrayed me. I saved this neighborhood, Ellen said. You were destroying it. A faint rumble rolled under our feet, subtle but deep. The kind of sound you don't hear as much, as feel in your bones. Everyone went still. The inspector shouted, Everyone back! Cracks laced across the concrete like lightning bolts. The seawall trembled, and a portion near the edge began to sink. The officer of rules stumbled backward, losing her balance as a plume of dust and dirt rose into the morning air. I grabbed Ellen's arm and pulled her toward the street as the wall slumped another foot. Vanessa's face was white now, her clipboard fallen in the mud. This isn't happening, she murmured. This can't be happening. Oh, it's happening, I said. It's just finally visible. The inspector shouted into radios, cordoning off the area. Neighbors stepped out of their homes, phones in hand, recording the scene. One by one, the whispers turned into murmurs, and the murmurs into outrage. She knew, someone yelled. She ignored the reports. Another voice. Our dues paid for that wall. Vanessa turned in a panic, clutching at the air as if she could rewrite reality. Stop filming. Everyone stop. But the camera flashes only multiplied. The clipboard queen, once the untouchable symbol of control, stood drenched in mud, trembling, cornered by her own arrogance. I walked past her slowly, leaning close enough for her to hear me over the chaos. You wanted control, Vanessa. Now you've got it, of the biggest sinkhole in the county. She didn't reply. She just stared past me, her eyes glassy, fixated on the widening pit devouring her manicured lawn. The inspector approached, shaking his head. We'll need to evacuate the house immediately. It's unsafe. Her lips parted, but no words came out. Ellen turned to me, voice low. She's finished, isn't she? I nodded. Legally, financially, publicly, the wall's not the only thing collapsing. I pulled out my phone and sent the footage and official inspection results to the local news station. The subject line read, HOA President endangered residents with illegal construction. By the time I looked up, reporters were already on their way. The sky had cleared to a bright, mocking blue, and as the enforcer in crimson stood surrounded by the ruins of her authority, I couldn't help but think justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it erodes, quietly, patiently, and then all at once. By the next morning, the entire neighborhood was buzzing like a disturbed hive. News vans lined the cul-de-sac. Camera crews angled lenses toward the half-collapsed seawall, where the once pristine lawn of Vanessa Crowley's mansion now sagged like a broken promise. The footage had gone viral overnight. HOA chair's property collapses after ignoring engineers' warnings. The clipboard queen had become a national example of poetic justice. Still, I knew her type well enough to realize it wasn't over. She'd never surrender, not out of guilt, but out of ego. Around 10 a.m., a black SUV pulled into her driveway, splattering mud on the curb. Out stepped Vanessa in a crimson blazer, freshly pressed, hair immaculate despite everything. The enforcer in crimson didn't believe in defeat, only delays. She spotted me standing across the street and called out, voice sharp enough to cut through the murmuring crowd. You think this is over, Mr. Rourke? You think the internet makes you right? I met her gaze calmly. Not me, Vanessa. Gravity made me right. Her jaw twitched. You humiliated me in front of the board, in front of my investors, in front of everyone. Correction, I said. You humiliated yourself the moment you decided physics was optional. She scoffed, turning to the cluster of reporters following her every step. This man sabotaged HOA property out of revenge. He falsified data and orchestrated this collapse. Flashes went off like gunfire. Microphones appeared. I didn't flinch. "Funny," I said, "because the county inspection report came from an independent agency you signed off on 3 years ago. Remember your own signature?" Her smile faltered. The cameras caught it. That was the moment she realized the more she spoke, the deeper she sank. The officer of rules turned away abruptly, barking at her attorney to escort her inside. The door slammed, but the reporters stayed, shouting questions at her windows. Ellen joined me on the sidewalk, looking both relieved and uneasy. "She's unraveling." "She's panicking," I corrected, "and panic always makes people dangerous." Ellen nodded slowly. "You think she'll try something?" "She already has." I handed her my phone. It displayed an email thread sent from the HOA's official account. Timestamps, attachments, and one unmistakable author name, Vanessa Crowley. The subject line read, HOA emergency statement, leak blame redirection. She was planning to accuse me of falsifying structural assessments while leaking an edited version of the reports online to paint herself as the victim. "She's weaponizing the narrative," Ellen whispered. "Then we weaponize the truth," I said. Within an hour, I contacted the investigative reporter who'd first covered the collapse. I sent them the full unedited files, including Vanessa's private directive to the contractor instructing him to patch it up cosmetically instead of rebuilding the seawall properly. By noon, the new headline hit every major feed. HOA president ordered cosmetic fix before collapse. Engineers report ignored. The clipboard queen's empire of image cracked wider than her lawn. But just as victory seemed certain, a new twist came. Vanessa filed an emergency injunction against the HOA's inspection disclosure, claiming the data was stolen private property. It was a desperate move, but it bought her one last day to breathe. That night, the board held a final emergency meeting to vote on her removal. For once, she didn't arrive early. She finally entered. Every board member turned to face her, eyes cold, silent. The enforcer in crimson looked smaller than I'd ever seen her. The heels, the confidence, all armor without purpose. "I'm still the chair," she said, forcing a brittle laugh. "You can't vote me out over rumors." The treasurer spoke first. "This isn't about rumors, Vanessa. It's about liability. The insurance carrier suspended our policy." She froze. "What?" Ellen slid a paper across the table. "They cited neglect of duty and fraudulent concealment. You left us exposed." Vanessa's eyes darted across the room. Faces that once followed her orders now looked away. "This is mutiny," she hissed. "No," I said quietly from the back. "It's gravity again." The clipboard queen's hands trembled, gripping the edge of the table like a lifeline. "You'll all regret this." The vote was swift, 5-0. Removal effective immediately. Her clipboard fell from her hand, the sound echoing like a gavel striking judgment. When she finally walked past me, her voice dropped low, almost a whisper. "You think this redeems you?" "It's not about redemption," I said. "It's about consequence." Outside, the news vans were waiting. The neighborhood watched in silence as Vanessa Crowley, the tyrant in heels, climbed into her car, mud spattering her once white tires. By morning, her resignation would make headlines. But as I looked toward the fractured seawall glowing faintly under the floodlights, I knew the ground wasn't done moving, because the truth, like erosion, never really stops. It just waits for pressure. By the time the sun rose the next morning, the neighborhood felt different, quieter, heavier, as if everyone was waiting for the ground to shift again. Vanessa Crowley's name was plastered across every local headline. HOA chair removed after seawall collapse scandal. Her manicured empire of order and intimidation was unraveling one article at a time. Still, I wasn't celebrating. Not yet. Because people like her don't just fall, they claw on their way down. Around 8 a.m., I received an unexpected call. It was from the county office. The voice on the other end was cautious. "Mr. Rourke, this is Inspector Delgado. We've received a notice of appeal from Ms. Crowley challenging the results of our investigation. She's requesting a secondary assessment and claiming your involvement created a conflict of interest." I leaned back in my chair. "Of course she is." "She's also alleging harassment and defamation," he continued. "But the audit continues as scheduled. We'll be on site in an hour." When I hung up, Ellen was already at my door. She held up her phone with a worried expression. You've seen this? The HOA's social page had exploded overnight. Vanessa, ever the tyrant in heels, had posted a live video of herself standing beside the cracked seawall, hair, perfectly styled, pretending to be a wrong martyr. In the clip, she said, "My reputation has been maliciously targeted by an unstable ex-engineer seeking revenge. This is what happens when we let vendettas dictate truth." "She's flipping the narrative," Ellen said, exasperated. "She's drowning," I replied calmly. And drowning people always thrash hardest before the end. By the time we reached the site, 2 county inspectors were already working, setting up laser levels and drilling small test holes. A crowd had gathered again, drawn by curiosity or karma. And there she was, the enforcer in crimson, standing near her porch, flanked by a lawyer and her ever-present clipboard. "Good morning, Ms. Crowley," the lead inspector said evenly. "We'll need to extend our perimeter another 15 feet. "That's ridiculous," she snapped. "You're trespassing beyond HOA property lines." "Not according to your subdivision's plat map," he said, showing her the printed layout. Her smile cracked. I walked up beside the inspectors. "You might want to stand back, Vanessa. That part of your yard isn't stable." Her eyes narrowed. "You just can't help yourself, can you? Always needing to be the hero." "Someone had to be," I said quietly. "You were too busy pretending." The clipboard queen bristled, but before she could fire back, one of the inspectors called out, "Sir, you'll want to see this." He held up a corroded drainage pipe barely 2 inches thick, its seam burst wide open. The water pressure had carved out the surrounding soil like wet sand. "This isn't regulation grade," the inspector said. "Looks like a cost-cutting replacement." Ellen stepped closer. Vanessa approved the maintenance contracts herself. The officer of rules turned pale. "That's a lie. The contractor chose the material, not me." "Except," I said, pulling up a PDF on my phone. "Here's your email authorizing the substitution. I believe your exact words were, 'Use cheaper piping. It's only cosmetic.'" The silence that followed was deafening. The crowd shifted uneasily, the reporter's cameras zooming in. Her lawyer tugged her sleeve, whispering urgently, but Vanessa pulled away. "This is a setup," she shouted. "You all think I'm the villain here, but he manipulated everything, every test, every report." I looked at her squarely. "The only thing I manipulated was a shovel. The rest was gravity." That line hit her like a slap. She trembled, then turned abruptly toward her mansion, as if retreating would somehow reverse time. But the ground itself betrayed her. A new fissure split open near the edge of the seawall, stretching under the porch where she stood. A few gasps erupted as the foundation groaned, a deep, mournful sound. The enforcer in crimson froze, her clipboard clattering to the ground. "Ma'am, get off that structure!" one inspector yelled. She backed. Away just as the porch tilted slightly downward. The sound of snapping wood echoed through the air. The reporters caught every frame, the symbol of HOA power literally collapsing beneath her. When she finally stepped onto solid ground, her composure was gone. Her lipstick was smeared, her hands shaking. I approached carefully, my tone steady but cold. "Vanessa, this is the last warning nature's going to give you." She glared at me, voice trembling. "You think this absolves you? You'll never belong here." I met her fury with quiet resolve. "That's the difference between us. I don't need to belong. I just need the truth to hold." Behind us, the inspector turned toward the crowd. "Effective immediately, this property is condemned. Residents within 100 yards are advised to relocate until further notice." Gasps spread through the spectators. Vanessa covered her mouth, eyes glistening. "Condemned?" she whispered, as though the word itself hurt to say. I looked toward the horizon where the seawall met the shining water. "You ignored every warning sign, Vanessa, and now you've finally built your kingdom underwater." Her shoulders sagged, her crimson jacket now streaked with dirt. The clipboard queen, who once ruled by fear, stood defeated, drowned not by the sea, but by her own arrogance. The emergency board meeting was held in the community recreation hall. Ironic, considering the very same room had once hosted Vanessa Crowley's smug HOA appreciation nights. Now, it looked more like a tribunal than a social gathering. Folding chairs were packed shoulder to shoulder, neighbors standing along the walls, murmuring in anxious tones. The air was thick with tension and the faint hum of ceiling fans. At the front of the room, the enforcer in crimson sat rigidly behind a table she once commanded. Her lipstick was flawless, but her hands trembled slightly as she straightened her notes. Even now, she was trying to project control, to pretend this was just another meeting where she'd lecture the neighborhood into submission. But the dynamic had shifted. For the first time, people weren't afraid to look her in the eye. The vice chair banged the gavel. This emergency meeting of the Willow Bay Homeowners Association is called to order. Every head turned as I walked to the front. I wasn't a board member, but the county inspector had requested that I present the findings. Findings that would leave no room for spin or manipulation. Vanessa's eyes followed me, sharp and venomous. "Mr. Rourke," she said coolly, "I hope you've come prepared with facts instead of theatrics." I set a folder on the table. "You'll get both." A faint ripple of laughter spread through the crowd. The clipboard queen's jaw tightened. I opened the report. For the record, the collapse of the seawall and subsidence under Ms. Crowley's property was caused by non-compliant materials substituted under her direction. The HOA's reserve funds were used to finance the project, though the structure benefited only her private lot. The treasurer, a man who'd always seemed terrified of her, cleared his throat. "Is that true, Vanessa? Did you authorize that without a board vote?" She leaned forward, her voice sharp as a blade. "I acted in the best interest of the association. That seawall protects all our properties. You're welcome." The officer of rules still knew how to twist words, but this time, her audience wasn't buying it. Ellen stepped up beside me. "You didn't protect us, Vanessa. You endangered us. You ignored every warning, silenced dissent, and then lied about where the money went." The crowd erupted, voices rising, neighbors pointing, shouting accusations. For months, they'd whispered behind closed doors, afraid of fines and retaliation. Now, the dam had burst. "You fined me for having potted plants," one woman yelled. "You sent threats over mailbox colors," shouted another. "And now, our insurance is suspended." The tyrant in heels stood, slamming her palm on the table. "Enough! You're all sheep. You think you can run this community without me? You'll drown in your own chaos." The irony of her words wasn't lost on anyone. I met her gaze and said evenly, "Funny choice of words, considering the state of your lawn." Laughter rippled through the crowd again, cutting through the tension. Vanessa's composure cracked. "You've turned them against me," she hissed. "You've poisoned everything I built." I shook my head. "No, Vanessa. You built the poison yourself. All I did was hold up a mirror." The vice chair raised his voice above the noise. "Motion to permanently remove Vanessa Crowley from all HOA leadership roles effective immediately." "Seconded," shouted three voices at once. "Motion carried," the vice chair declared. "Effective immediately. Ms. Crowley's authority is revoked. The county assumes oversight until a new election is held." The clipboard queen's mouth fell open. "You can't do this. I am this community." Ellen stepped forward, calm but firm. "You were. Now you're just another homeowner. One who owes damages." A wave of applause broke out. Cameras flashed from local reporters at the back. The once feared board chair looked around desperately, but there was nowhere left to run. Every pair of eyes that once lowered in fear now stared straight through her facade. Her voice softened, almost pleading. "You don't understand. I was trying to keep order. Someone had to." I leaned closer. "You confused control with care. That's what destroyed you." Outside, thunder rolled over the bay, deep, distant, and poetic. As the meeting adjourned, people began to filter out, some hugging, some still shaken. Justice didn't feel triumphant. It felt heavy, like an overdue reckoning. Ellen stayed behind with me as Vanessa gathered her scattered papers, pretending not to tremble. "She's not done," Ellen whispered. "She's too proud to disappear quietly." I nodded. "She'll try something desperate before she falls completely. But by then..." I glanced toward the half-lit windows where reporters were already filing their updates. "The tide will take care of it." Vanessa stopped at the doorway, rain beginning to patter outside. For a fleeting moment, she looked back, not at the crowd, but at me. Her voice was low, bitter, and cracked at the edges. "You think the water ends this story? Wait until you see what comes next." And then she was gone, heels clicking against the wet pavement, the sound fading like the last echo of a storm that had finally spent itself. By the next morning, the storm had passed, but its echo lingered over Willow Bay like a ghost that refused to leave. The seawall, or what was left of it, lay half submerged in murky water. Mud-slick debris floated against the curb where children used to play. The HOA office, once Vanessa Crowley's personal fortress, sat empty, its glass door rattling in the wind. For the first time in years, the neighborhood was silent. No warning slips tucked under doormats, no neon ink violation notices, no tyrant in heels stalking the sidewalks with her clipboard like a badge of divinity. Just the sound of gulls circling above a bay that had finally claimed what arrogance built too close to the edge. I walked along the shoreline with Ellen, boots sinking into the damp sand. She carried a thermos of coffee in one hand, her other clutching a stack of new HOA nomination forms. "Never thought I'd see the day people volunteered for this job," she said with a half smile. "They're not volunteering," I said quietly. "They're reclaiming." She looked toward the wreckage of the enforcer in Crimson's mansion, the once gleaming balcony now tilted downward like a sinking ship. "Do you think she'll come back?" "She'll try," I replied. "Control addicts always do, but this time there'll be nothing left to control." As if on cue, my phone buzzed. A new message. Vanessa Crowley. It read, "You think you've won? Watch what the tide brings next." Ellen glanced at the screen. "She's still fighting ghosts." "She always will," I said, pocketing the phone. "But I'm done giving her an audience." We reached the broken seawall. The county had posted bright orange caution tape across the jagged edge, but nature didn't care for warnings. It just moved forward. Waves lapped against the concrete like slow applause. I crouched, tracing my fingers along the fractured line of the structure. "You know," I said softly, "this wall used to be her symbol of power. Every inch of it screamed control. Straight lines, perfect symmetry, the illusion of permanence. But the earth doesn't bargain with illusion." Ellen nodded. "It's poetic, really. The woman who fined people for cracked driveways gets swallowed by her own foundation." Behind us, the sound of hammers and voices rose from a few houses already under repair. Life was returning, slowly, honestly. Without Vanessa's shadow looming over it, Willow Bay was breathing again. Later that evening, the community gathered by the park for what used to be board announcements. Only this time, there were no podiums or power plays. Just neighbors sitting on folding chairs beneath a sunset sky, faces illuminated by the golden light filtering through salt-stained trees. Ellen stood at the front, papers in hand. "From this day forward," she said, "the HOA serves the homeowners, not the other way around. No more secret votes, no more intimidation. And if anyone has questions or concerns, the microphone is open." Applause spread through the crowd, soft at first, then growing louder, warmer, real. In the back row, I sat quietly, watching. I didn't need to speak anymore. The story had already been told in full, the warnings, the arrogance, the collapse. And the water that had once divided us now glimmered under the fading sun like a mirror of reckoning. Still, I couldn't shake one final thought. For all her cruelty, the clipboard queen had served a purpose. Her downfall became the blueprint for everyone else's freedom. Sometimes tyranny leaves behind the very blueprint of resistance. I stood and walked toward the shore. The air smelled clean, washed of chlorine and control. In the distance, the ruined frame of Vanessa's house stood half drowned, its reflection shimmering like a ghost refusing to sink. "She built it too close to the edge," Ellen said behind me. "Maybe," I replied, "but she also built it as a warning. People like her always do, without meaning to." The sky turned crimson, the same color she used to wear like armor. For a brief second, I almost felt pity. Almost. Then I remembered the years of fear, the neighbors she humiliated, the threats, the fines. And the pity vanished like mist. Somewhere out there, I knew she was watching. Maybe from a rented apartment inland, maybe from behind another HOA's curtain, plotting her next reign. But the tide always remembers, and this time, the tide wasn't on her side. As I turned to leave, I looked back one final time at the bay. The last light shimmered over the water, and I whispered, mostly to myself, "That's where you held your meetings, Vanessa. And that's where your legacy stays. Underwater." Ellen smiled faintly hearing it. "You should tell that story someday." "I just did," I said. And as we walked away, the wind carried the faint creak of the broken seawall, a sound that wasn't tragedy anymore, but closure. If you've ever watched arrogance collapse under its own weight, if you've ever stood your ground against someone who thought their title made them untouchable, hit the subscribe button. Share your stories in the comments and tell me, where are you watching from? Because you already know how this feels. And if stories like this remind you that ordinary people can still win against impossible odds, stick around. Because this isn't just about an HOA. It's about standing tall where others sink.